Good day. This video would show how you can set up the B1505 using Easy Expert. So when you first turn on Easy Expert, you may be prompted with this prompt. If you're not, just bear with me for a bit here. If you are, you would want to check that you have the right visa address connected to the B1505, for example, or whichever module you have. Because I do not have a instrument with me, I'm just going to go with the offline version. And for this video, we are going to go with the B1505A. So if you happen to be using a different model, just go ahead and select the right model. You can also go into the configuration here. This is the offline version, so it's probably not going to match. Just to check that you have the right SMUs connected. Okay, so I'm just going to click that off and hit OK. Now then, you'll be presented with the Start Easy Expert tab. So if you turn on Easy Expert and you're prompted with this and would like to go into the Configurations tab, go to Options and Communication, and you'll be prompted back again with this. Okay, so let's go ahead and start Easy Expert. So this is the workspace. As with some devices, this may look familiar. If not, you can create a new workspace and give it a right title. So I will do that for this. Let's do example. And you can tick to allow others to use other users to access this workspace. So if you're not logged in, you can prevent people from accessing your workspace. But if you're just going to set it as a general workspace, then you could just tick that off. If you have some workspaces created previously, you could always go back and continue with that same workspace. So for this example, I'm just going to go ahead and create new workspace. Again, this is the default setup, so you could go ahead and click on that. So this is the interface you'll be prompted with. Let's run through a few settings before we proceed with the basic IV test setup. So on the file, you have the usual Windows operation where you could create a new test definition, open some previous test definition, import test setups, your favorite groups and such. You can also export your test setup or data, and you can save favorites as well. Under edit is the usual cut, copy, paste. Under view, you could view the different tabs. So we have four, which are the application tests, classic tests, tracer tests, and quick tests. You can also view the data display. So run would be to run the setups. So this three here, single, append, and repeat, represents these three buttons on the top. In case you need to look for them, you can always go to run. Tools is where you have the preferences, data display, test results, and you would want to go to system configuration just to check that you have the right latest firmware, or in case you have an issue and need to contact Keysight Care, this system information would be critical. You can also go ahead and run a diagnosis to check that the status of the system is passing. So we'll move on to the next tab, which is the modules tab. You will want to ensure that the module type matches your physical unit. And again, you could do a self-test just to check that they're all passing and there's no errors with any of the SMUs. If you have a dual HC SMU combination, then you can enable that. Again, you want to just make sure you select the right SMU for it. In the case where you have a module selector like the N1258A, again, when you're running certain measurements that utilizes the module selector, you would want to enable them. If you have auto detection selected, it should pick the right SMUs that would work with the module selector. But in case it's not, you could always pull down the drop-down list and select the right ones. Again, as with the next few tabs too, you could always start a diagnosis to check that they're all passing. Next, we have the UHC expander fixture. Again, if you have this as part of your system, you want to enable that and ensure that it's detected for your measurements. So the next tab would be the high voltage SMU current expander. And then we have the N1268A ultra high voltage expander. So again, enable this if you have them in your system. Next in the list would be the device capacitance selector. So if the system you're using is utilizing a device capacitance selector for CV measurements, you would enable that. There's also a gate charge adapter, and you can apply this, but if you do not, just leave it be. And then you have the SMU output setting limits. So this should match the specs of your SMU. You would want to set the voltage and currents according to your SMU specifications. So in the event there's an error and you're not very sure, you could always go to the event log. It will show you the users and what sort of error messages there is. When you're doing that, you could always screenshot that and send it to the Keysight Care team if you need support with it. Okay, so let's just look at how we could set up a very basic IV trace. This is under the tracer test. So the first thing you would want to do is hit add and select the SMU you'll be using for this IV test. So in this case, I'm just going to go with the high power SMU and keep it there. Once you have that, you'll see in the variable 1, mode is linear single. You can always change that accordingly. Number of steps is defaulted to 101. If you need to, you can always increase that. And compliance is, again, if you want the system to trip off once it's reached the measurement, just go ahead and change that here. The next two things you want to adjust is the horizontal and vertical max settings. So for this example, let's just go ahead and do 1.5 volts. You can now then save this setup and name it something that you would be able to recognize. So I have IV tray setup example, and then you can hit the save button, and that would now appear here. Be pretty happy with this. You could always add more measurements. Again, if you want to change the titles, you could always change it here. For example, device 1, and that should then update the plots. So now that we're happy with that, let's hit a single run. And under the results tab here, you should be able to then click on that. If you want to export results, you could go ahead and do that here. If you want to import, you could also click on this. So now let's double click on that and you'll be prompted with the results table. Unfortunately, I do not have an actual measurements being run. If you do, you should see the IV curve here. But just to run through a few settings that we went through, the list display would represent the 101 points that we were measuring. Now you would want to go to view and go to data display so that you can analyze your data. Let's go ahead and do that. So this should be much clearer, and as you can see, I set it to 1.5 volts, and that's what we have here. You can then turn on markers. It'll be represented by a circle as you go through the points. Again, because I do not have any results, the 101 points are just showing 0 volts and 0 amps. But in your case, you should have a linear graph that you could put markers onto. So from here, you could always do an export to Excel. If you want to export it to a different format, you would do it back in the Tracer Test menu right here. So if you select that, you could export it. It's a CSV file or a text file or a spreadsheet. That would wrap up a basic IV test measurement. So now let's just go ahead to a classic test, and from here you could still use the same setups, so you can then select under your favorites and do a recall. And if I were to take that and hit run, the same format, the same setups be displayed, so 1.5 volts and 101 points, so these settings would match what I've saved. just to recall, let's go back to trace a test. There are some sample setups that might help, so you could always click on this to see the different setups we have. Let's have a look here. So I have an IFVF sample setup, and it automatically sets it according to the SMU to 40 amps and 2 volts. So that's all I have. Thanks for watching.